It's great to be here with you all. Looking forward to our talk today about fulfillment at work and specifically how we can address what is, as we'll see, and what I'm sure a lot of people in the audience have already recognized is while I think it's always been a very important issue in the workplace, it's one that's become much more salient because workers themselves are really realizing the importance of it and are beginning to take actions when they're not feeling it. And we're going to talk today about how you all can be creating cultures that are the kind that workers want to move towards and stay in. Let me give you a little bit of background on me as we get started, because I find it's helpful to have some context. It'll inform a lot of the things that you'll hear me say and our kind of particular and I think somewhat unique worldview. I've had the privilege of having a very eclectic career over the last 30 years since I finished my graduate training, focused on behavioral psychology, in particular motivation and well-being, and issues around things like engagement and fulfillment. I spent some time working directly as a clinician. That technically my training was in clinical psychology, and so a lot of the sensitivity I have to how people are feeling supported and how people are feeling fulfilled is definitely informed by being very focused on that and interested in that for many decades now. I also, as I just mentioned, have had a lot of interesting time as a behavioral scientist. I'm a nerd that loves to dive into questions about not just understanding what's happening within people, but how do we measure those things? How do we conceptualize them? How do we get information that we can then take action on in order to improve people's lives, and really doing it from a scientific standpoint, meaning we're collecting data, we're validating our ideas. This is something that gets overlooked a lot, I find, in business contexts where there's a kind of a purely consultative approach there, because there's a lot of investment in areas like employee engagement, employee well-being, and fulfillment, but there's not enough science informing that. There's not enough data, and so there's not enough risk protection on that investment. People are all the time going down the wrong roads, even if they're well-intentioned. And I think that hopefully some behavioral science that I'll touch on today will kind of help to inform how you might move forward on this issue of employee engagement and fulfillment. And finally, I've also been running companies for the last 25 years. I'm a serial entrepreneur, I guess is the term they use for this, and that I've started a couple of different companies now and built them up. And I bring up that piece of experience because I do know what it's like to sit in the practical role of a CEO that has to focus on the bottom line and look at costs and manage companies when they're moving in a positive direction, when they're moving in a challenge direction or a negative direction in terms of the business. And so I am very attuned to the fact that even though we may bring aspirational ideas from behavioral psychology and from human fulfillment and well-being, and we're going to use a lot of those aspirational terms today, that at the end of the day, they still need to have practical benefits to the organization as well as to the individuals. And everything we're going to talk about today has those benefits. And I think that's one of the reasons that I get excited about the ideas that we're going to review. I want to start by talking about the fact that we have a crisis going on right now. I use that word deliberately because I think that even though we've all gotten used to the fact that there's an endemic problem with things like employee engagement, and no matter what we seem to do, it languishes with less than half of employees really engaged, sometimes as low as 30%. But we have a lot of other issues happening in a much more pronounced way since the start of the pandemic. since 2019. If you look at stats coming out of CDC and the National Center for Health Statistics, there's been an over 300% jump in the rates of anxiety symptoms and depressive symptoms, in the general population. And so when we start to look at the issue of well-being everywhere, not just in the workplace, but one of the core themes I want to hit is we need to stop compartmentalizing the workplace from the rest of life. And I'm going to come back to this a few different times. We need to start thinking about our employees and ourselves as realizing we're all in the same human boat, and that the stress that we've all been under and we continue to be under is real and growing. And so we need to address that, both for the good of the organization, but also for the good of ourselves, and for the good of our people and the good of society. And these are kind of aspirational things that I think we can put into practice that will also have very practical benefits to both employees and to our organization. But this is kind of the first of these, three things I want to hit on today, which is that we need to embrace need fulfillment as a core practice. When we think about employee fulfillment, we need to not think about it as a fringe activity or as a tactic to, well, I need to think about this because I need to retain employees. Now, it might be true that you need to retain employees. Matter of fact, this is probably the most common problem that we're hearing currently from our clients. And as I'm talking with leaders out there, and will need fulfillment help to resolve that? Yes, it will help to resolve that. But if we just think about that as a tactic in order to get retention, then you're not authentically embracing this idea as a core practice in your culture. So when I say authentic and a core practice, I mean there needs to be a soul searching that goes on in leadership and in the organization to say that, we have an opportunity here to participate in the well-being, fulfillment, happiness of all the people that are in our care. We have the opportunity here to finally look at that mission statement on the wall that says people first in some way, shape, or form, and almost every mission statement has that, and really make that truly more than rhetoric, but make it a real best practice in our organization. And as we're going to go through today, we're going to see all kinds of evidence as to why we need to do this, but I've already gone over the only stats that we really need to see, right? Which is, we see increased need, and we all know, we've heard the terms great resignation, we've heard the term quiet quitting, we've heard all these terms about how employees are becoming discouraged and shutting down, and need fulfillment is the pathway to solving these problems for both them and for the organization. This isn't, it's a major issue, by the way, when you look at where we stand right now, which is when you look at employees like, does my company care about me? Employees' faith in their leaders and in their organizations is in free fall. You can see here's where we are down here, and it's really taken this tremendous drop down to a 10-year low. And I don't see any reason why it's probably not slipping further from this latest point. Interestingly, you'll notice it surged at the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic. And if you search, I've done some previous talks on HCI that dive into this in more detail, this particular effect. But I'll just briefly touch on the fact that that surge had to do, it was almost like an empirical test of the ideas I'm talking about already. That surge had to do with the fact that when the coronavirus hit and we were all just essentially blindsided and shocked in a place that none of us have ever experienced before, what happened was we all started to just act like human beings, and leadership began to very genuinely and authentically do things to say we need to take care of each other and take care of our people. And guess what? Guess what happened? We saw what we had not seen in 10 or 20 years of billions of investment in our fancy programs and our fancy engagement systems and our, whatever it might be. We saw something incredible happen in numbers just based on this authentic leadership. We call it leading by care, leadership by care. But you can see we didn't learn the lesson. We didn't retain. And I keep coming back and hitting this because there was an empirical test that was unplanned at the beginning of the coronavirus of the ideas I'm talking about now that um, that validates a lot of what we're about to talk about. But this downward slope shows that we need to turn the ship back around and get things right sized with respect to caring about people and really focusing on their fulfillment. Now, I think in order to do that, we need to acknowledge something that's, some bosses and some leaderships, some people in leadership would probably say outright, but a lot would only kind of express, they wouldn't say it out loud, but they'd express it in practice, which is, hey, this is a business, we're here to work. We're not here to make you feel good. It's not that I don't want you to be happy, but it's not my job, right? And again, this is something that isn't working. And you can see that in the numbers I've just showed you. You could see that in the decline in the graph. You can see that in the Great Resignation and all these other trends, right? Which is workers are saying, well, I don't agree with you, and I'm voting with my feet. And more importantly, this has been one of the core, foundational problems that we haven't addressed. That's suppressed and even hollowed out a lot of our efforts at engagement with our people. And a lot of this comes from this idea that, well, the way that you find fulfillment is not at work. We're here to do a job. We pay you a salary, but we do support you need to have work-life balance, right? And so we talk about this idea of work-life balance. This idea of work-life balance is in and of itself broken. There's so much ground that we cede to a miserable work life when we talk about work-life balance, because the way that we think about work-life balance right now and the way people talk about it is make sure you do enough enjoyable things outside of work to balance out the misery of your work life. That's how we understand it. Just stop for a minute and think about that. I know I'm talking right now to a group of very dedicated HR professionals, and this is a special group in the sense that I know that you all are committed. When I show kind of the grumpy guy on the previous slide, I'm not suggesting that that's you. I think there's a lot of, genuine caring about people. This is why we go into this profession, right? But I do think that we all use this term of kind of work-life balance in this kind of way that, we need to be making sure that we're balancing enjoyable things on the life side against the unenjoyable things on the work side. And if we are all spending the majority of our waking hours thinking about or in our work environment, then this is a problem for life. This is a problem for human fulfillment. It's a problem for well-being. And we need to completely rethink this entire concept. And interestingly, this is not only the wrong way to think about it, but it's not even what the term originally was invented to convey. So if you look back at the history, this was a term invented by Lillian Gilbreth, in the early 20th century, who, when she was defining this idea and there was a big move around productivity in the workplace, she identified that there was a sense of gratification that comes from productive work, recognition of a job well done. There was a gratification, a fulfillment, if you will, right, that came together. And by linking those psychological aspects with productivity, that was the ideal situation. In other words, work-life balance was that you needed to find fulfillment and satisfaction in your work in the same way that you were finding those things in life. And that was kind of the optimal way for companies to run. Now, I will say that she did think about it. She was definitely thinking about this from the standpoint of what I would call transactionally, which is that this is the way to actually get greater productivity, et cetera. And that is true. But what she was hitting on something when she invented this term of satisfaction needs to run across all of life. And that's what we all want, right? We all want that. And it doesn't matter what your role is, whether you're a downstream employee or you're mid-level, management, or you're a senior leader, we all share that desire to feel fulfilled in our lives, not fulfilled in one area, and then we're willing to tolerate another one. We want to feel fulfilled across our lives. And when we feel more fulfillment at work, there will be greater engagement. There will be greater performance. We know this. This is why we chase after engagement. This is why every leadership survey will talk about engagement as a priority at my organization. It's because we know that this is good for the organization. But what I want to say is that we can't think about this transactionally, right? So when I talk about this as a core practice, we can't think about it transactionally. It can't be, let's help support people's needs so that I can get more productivity out of them. Because any of that kind of transactional thinking, again, will hollow out this idea. We need to be doing this because it's the right thing to do, because human beings deserve to have fulfillment, because it leads to that kind of happiness, vitality, and engagement. Naturally, it emerges from the person when they are in a healthy state. And when we take that point of view, it actually, I've seen this happen time and again, it empowers us. We feel more vitality. We feel more fulfillment in our work as HR professionals. We feel more fulfillment as C-suite professionals because we're focused on something that is fundamental and intrinsically engaging. So let me now shift to, because I've sort of made that point about the importance, right, of making this a central component and making it a core idea. But now the question is, and this is where some of that behavioral science comes into play, how do we do that? What are we talking about? How do we understand what fulfillment even means? How are we going to put this into practice? So the next thing that we need to be committed to here is that we need to understand need fulfillment in depth. We need to really understand what need fulfillment means. Because just like engagement, or just like many of the other things that we talk about a lot in HR functions and when we talk about our cultures, these terms are very aspirational. Nobody has a problem understanding them, having kind of a personal understanding. We all understand the gist of it. We all know what fulfillment kind of feels like because we're human beings. But we have a different role in the organization, which is we have to figure out, how do we build cultural norms? How do we build systems? How do we build training? How do we build things in the right direction in order to grow these aspirational ideas? And this is where things so often break, right? So we're going to get into some of the research on this, but one point I want to make right at the beginning is that fulfillment doesn't mean that the job is fun, or that fulfillment doesn't even necessarily mean happiness, right? And it's a very common mistake that we colloquially think about fulfillment. Doesn't mean that they aren't correlated. There's definitely a correlation there, but they really aren't the same thing. You can feel very fulfilled in things that aren't really enjoyable, but they can be very fulfilling what you're doing. I'll give a good example. This talk for me. Now, I've been doing talks for decades, and I actually right now I find this very meaningful. It's a great privilege to be able to talk to you all and do this. But I'll tell you, I don't enjoy preparing for a talk. I find it to be a lot of work. I'm kind of a neurotic person. I'll think about, all right, how to build the narrative, how to make these points, how to do this. There's nothing fun about that. It's not necessarily a happy process, but I do find it very fulfilling and very meaningful. And so we do need to understand fulfillment at a deeper level. And again, this is where we're unpacking the need for that kind of psychology and more of a framework and a model. Because we tend to think, when we think about these aspirational ideas, whether it's fulfillment or engagement or whatever it might be, we tend to overestimate that we can just be in one place. We're like, okay, well, we know this is a goal. I know intuitively what fulfillment means. I've felt fulfilled in my life. So we mistake that for a clear understanding of how to put it into our cultures. We think we're going to draw this line, but we overestimate how easily we can connect that, right? Because really fulfillment could be, any number of things, and we don't very clearly know what and where is B in this A to B line, right? How do we measure it? Is it different for different people? How do we know that the way we conceptualize and measure it is right? How in the world am I going to do this across 10, 100, 1,000, 10,000 employees? Now, again, I know I'm talking to HR professionals. You all I've mentioned this already. I know you're all very smart, competent people, and you've probably thought about these ideas in particular in your role quite a bit. And so you may and I can believe that this is true, very accurately be like, hey, fulfillment, I don't have a problem with that. I'm very good with people. I can sit down with somebody, have a conversation with them, help them feel listened to, help them feel fulfilled. And I bet that that's true. But again, I want to say that your personal ability to do that, or the fact that probably 20, 30, maybe even 50% of your managers have the gift of that natural ability with people, that is not going to help you to build it across the culture, because you don't have the common language that you need to instantiate it in the culture. You don't have the language you need to create training, to create support, right? So you need something like, is that personal definition validated or actionable or measurable or scalable or universal? Chances are that it's not, right? And so we need to kind of push past the fact that there are individual competencies around understanding and even being able to intervene with employees to understand fulfillment, and zoom out and say, how can I get a framework in place that I can trust, that's validated, and that can do all these things across the organization? Perhaps not surprisingly, I'm going to show you one. It's awesome. It's one that has been around for over 40 years now, and it's the most widely used and cited model for well-being and motivation and engagement in practice right now in the world, and it's called self-determination theory. And it really is. I like to frame it as the science of fulfillment, but also, well-being, motivation. These are all things that are interrelated. There have been thousands of studies within self-determination theory over decades that have identified what fulfillment means and how to support it. I just put a graph here of just the growth in citations from Google Scholar over the last 20 years, and it's really been the last 10 or 15 that there's been this tenfold increase. Last year alone there was almost 50,000 references to this model and to this framework. So the reason I emphasize that is you can trust it. You can trust the ideas I'm about to talk about having been well validated and also actionable as we go through some of the best practice. And so what is self-determination theory? Let's now go over what does self-determination theory have to say about need fulfillment and what need fulfillment means. Can we define it clearly? And to use a fancier term for define, operationalize. And the reason behavioral scientists like to use that term is operationalize is how are we going to operate in order to achieve the kinds of goals that we want to achieve in moving people towards greater fulfillment. So there's a science of basic needs and need fulfillment that's really well established in self-determination theory. And what self-determination theory talks about are three basic psychological needs that are at the heart of people feeling fulfilled. And that if you focus on these three needs, you will see a tremendous increase in virtually every cultural metric and organizational people metric you're trying to raise. Are you trying to address inclusion? Are you trying to address engagement? Are you trying to address wellness, well-being? Are you trying on the cost side to mitigate retention, mitigate healthcare costs, mitigate all? What we're going to talk about today is going to positively impact across all of these metrics. So what are the three basic needs? Well, we're going to go over them in detail, but they're the needs for autonomy, the need for relatedness, and the need for mastery. One thing I'll say off the bat is it's very exciting to me that I didn't say there are 27 needs. I bet it's exciting to you too. Like there are 27 needs you need to focus on. There's just these three. And believe me, over 40 years, there have been all kinds of proposed other needs. Candidates come in like, well, isn't this a fourth need? Isn't this a fifth need? And still these three always emerge as the primary needs to this point. Does that mean SDT isn't open to there being others? Yeah, sure. Always open to it. But this is why we do the research. This is why we do the testing. So you can trust these needs are really at the heart because they're very battle tested. So let's talk about them a bit more. Autonomy. Autonomy is the basic need we have to feel that we're the authors of our lives, right? We want to endorse the things that we're doing. We want to feel ownership of the things that we're doing. And you hear ownership talked about a lot in organizations. Like, well, we want people to take ownership of their work. This idea of endorsement is that we want to feel when we're going about our day, when we're doing the things that we're doing, that we are volitionally engaged with those things, that they reflect our values, they reflect who we are. It doesn't mean that we have to feel free and choice, like we have a choice over everything we're doing. And autonomy often gets misunderstood as being freedom and choice. And this is why a lot of leaders and a lot of organizations kind of will begrudgingly say, yeah, I know people like to feel that kind of freedom. I know. And the reason I say begrudgingly is because they know as leaders, we have stuff we got to get done. We have policies and procedures. I need that. There needs to be structure and control. So there's this implicit tension that happens between the common understanding of autonomy and the practical realities of what businesses need to do. But there doesn't need to be that tension because guess what? Autonomy is not fundamentally about freedom. It's not fundamentally about, feeling like you can do whatever you want to do. I haven't put freedom or choice even in this definition because it's really about this sense of I'm endorsing what I'm doing, even when I don't have choice. If I believe in what I'm doing, then even if I don't have a choice to be doing it, I will feel very autonomous. And that's going to have some profound implications for how we set up training and how we help to train managers and leaders and even the employees themselves to find more autonomy at work. So autonomy, what does it look like? Again, not fundamentally about freedom or independence, but it's this sense of endorsement, right? So do I understand how my job contributes to the mission? How the things that I'm doing this week, or if you're in an agile cycle, what am I doing during this sprint, and whatever the structure might be in your organization, do I understand how my job is contributing to the overall mission? Because once I understand that connection, then I'm able to more fully endorse what I'm doing. Works much better than why am I doing this because I was told to do it? Because that's what Bob, my boss's supervisor, Bob, says it has to be done by Thursday. That's not going to help me to endorse what's happening, right? So my autonomy is going to be suppressed. But even if I have that same deadline, if I understand the rationale, then I'm going to feel more autonomous. And that's why I have the second point here. Am I given clear rationales for tasks, policies, and procedures? Are my objections and struggles heard and acknowledged? One of the things we know from the research is that if people have a sense that they're being listened to across the full spectrum of their emotions, their experiences, their perceptions of something, then they're going to feel much more able and capable to fully endorse continuing down the path with you, right? Doesn't mean you have to solve their problems. It just means you need to acknowledge them, listen to them, and acknowledge their validity, because then people aren't going to feel like you're just pushing them around and controlling them and shutting them off. And so they're much more likely to kind of endorse and be engaged. Now, I have I've been in this situation a lot of times where something pretty untoward happens or difficult happens. Every organization has this, right? Layoffs need to happen, or deadline needs to be met, or whatever it might be. Or there's a pandemic. There's all kinds of things. Right? There's a concern that if I open up Pandora's box of listening to the negative feelings and I don't have a solution, or I'm not in kind of solution mode around those things, that it's going to be absolute chaos. It's going to be gasoline on a fire rather than helping people kind of settle down and all work together. And that instinct is always wrong. Sitting and listening to those things, opening up those doors, even if you don't have solutions, will actually help people to feel much more autonomous. And even though circumstances may be tough, they're much more likely to be on board and to move forward together as a team. Do I have meaningful choice in how I execute my job? Wherever possible, it is helpful to give choice. And we see a lot of the discussion. Again, I've done a couple other webinars specifically on this, so you can search for them on remote work versus hybrid work versus how are we going to do things. And we see this tension kind of playing out. Is there meaningful choice in how I execute my job? And I just want to say there is no right or wrong answer, but think about some of the other points I just made. Is that if you don't have a good rationale for why everybody needs to be in the office 2 days a week, if it's just kind of a rule, guess what? People aren't going to feel very autonomous around that choice, right? So there's all kinds of ways in which this interacts in order to get successful buy-in to policies. Are there structures in place? This goes to the point I just made, or ones that I understand, endorse, and value. I think we talked about those things. And so all these things, these are just some examples. They roll up again into this experience in the employee of I believe. I believe in what I'm doing. I might not like it. I might feel pressure or might feel this, but I'm on board. I endorse, I believe. The second basic psychological need I want to go over is the need for relatedness. Now, this is our basic need to feel that, the shorthand way to understand this is I matter. I matter to my coworkers. I matter to my manager. We want to feel respected. We want to feel supported. We want to feel cared for, right? At the beginning of the pandemic, when leaders were very authentically putting their arms around people in the organization to give them support, relatedness surged, right? People did feel cared for and supported. We also want to have the opportunity to reciprocate that caring to others. That also helps to support our relatedness. And so what does that look like for employees? Well, they want to know, is my perspective valued? Do I matter to the coworkers in the organization? Am I included in planning and problem solving? Do I have a voice? Are my ideas and objections heard? Do I feel like I'm making value contributions to the collective work that's being undertaken? Again, this is a basic psychological need. And I'll just pause for a minute and say that we've now kind of covered two. We'll do the third in a minute. But when I say basic psychological need, one of the great qualities of these needs is that they exist in you and they exist in me. And they exist in every human being on this planet. They are as basic to us as humans as thirst or hunger is to us as humans. In other words, you can trust in these to be operating. And just like thirst and hunger, if you don't get the nutrients you need, you will languish. But if you get the nutrients you need, you will thrive. So this is why these are so foundational. And if you support autonomy, support relatedness, you're going to see more of that thriving and that fulfillment in your employees, regardless of their segment, whether they're, we can put aside all the discussions about, well, but don't millennials have different needs? It's like, nope. Guess what? Human beings, right? I know to some of us older people, it doesn't feel that way, but they're human beings. So guess what? These needs apply. So it's a great foundation on which you can then build your other programs. So relatedness, that rolls up to this experience of I belong. I belong. I feel like I belong in this organization. I belong with this team. I belong working with these people. The third basic psychological need to touch on is the need for mastery. Mastery, and this is another one that I think is pretty easy to resonate with. We want to be successful in what we're doing, right? Yeah, sure. At work, we want to be successful, but really everywhere we're doing something. Could be in our hobbies or sports we play, or playing Monopoly with our family. We want to be successful. We want to feel we're effective, and we don't want to be just successful in the moment. We want to feel a sense of growth and development in our skills, right? This is a natural, again, intrinsic need that's operating for us. And so what does mastery look like for employees? How is this kind of fulfilled? What are the kinds of questions that we can be thinking about? Well, do I consider myself both effective and skillful at my job? So effective is just can I get it done competently? But skillful is, am I really good at it? Right? Both of these things are important. And again, in some previous talks, I've gone into some detail about how there's there's kind of a ramp of competence and mastery that happens where you start from schema building to effectiveness to skill to mastery, and that creates kind of a scaffolding experience that can be very helpful to supporting employees. Am I confident in my ability to succeed? Do I have that sense of confidence that I'm going to be skillful and masterful? How frequently do I experience wins? It's very important to kind of be watching as a manager, as a leader, how frequently that's happening. But as an employee themselves, we're going to talk about how to include employees in need fulfillment efforts. They need to be kind of thinking about that as well. Do I see lanes for growth? Not just a promotion, but growth in my skills, or the things that I can do, the things that I can undertake and continue to master. And in support of all that, does the organization support my learning, which again is one of the tools for that kind of pathway? And what does all this roll up to in terms of the summary experience for the employee? Is the sense I succeed, right? I succeed in what I'm doing. I succeed day to day, and I succeed in my overall role in the organization. And so each of these building blocks of well-being or fulfillment, what's great about them is because this is a science, we're going to go over, these are really easily understood, measured, and actionable, right? Autonomy, I believe. Mastery, I succeed. Relatedness, I belong. And I hope that we've covered this first one, which is that they're easily understood. Sure, there's nothing I've said that's very confusing. As a matter of fact, it almost feels kind of too simple, doesn't it? These ideas certainly resonate with you. As like, yeah, that's important. Yeah, I understand. I get it. And I'm sure, again, as HR professionals, you probably more than most intuitively kind of understand and do a lot of things to support these things in your people, because that's how you became successful at what you're doing. But the idea here is that you can begin to have a very clear framework. And when we work with our clients over many years, the vocabulary for talking about need supports and being able to look at the various needs and listen for measure, listen, intervene where needed, creates a much more powerful way to support fulfillment across the organization. So that's why having a framework like this, is this the only framework you can adopt? No, but this one is the most the most established one out there. So if you're looking for one, there's no better one than this to grab onto. And I'll give some more resources at the end that you can explore. The third thing that I want to say about effectively doing this is that you want to include everyone actively in need fulfillment efforts. And by everyone, I mean every single person in the organization. Too often, these programs are about, let's give leaders information and tools and dashboards. I see this all the time with engagement programs in particular, right? We'll give all this information about how engagement's going, and we'll segment and we'll have meetings and we'll look at graphs and PowerPoint slides. But by we, I mean leadership, right? And then we'll maybe kind of give managers, reports, and then we'll say to managers, go fix this with your teams, or we'll set goals for the managers. But employees they answer all the questions, but they're not directly included as equal partners in the process. So we want to change that. This needs to be transformed, that everyone is actually responsible, including the employee themselves, for need fulfillment. So leaders are, managers are, and employees are. So again, I'm trying to be aware of time here. I want to get finished up pretty quickly. Let's go over need supportive leaders. Well, first, we've talked about this a lot. What can you do to be a need supportive leader? Lead by care, right? This is the very first point I made in this talk. Do it very authentically. Create that vision where need fulfillment is part of the vision, right? Need fulfillment is there for all stakeholders. Certainly you want to fulfill needs for customers and other things, but let's include employees. Let's include all the stakeholders in that. We want to communicate and provide the whys and the rationales, right? That builds that autonomous engagement. Practice need support. Again, this is just good modeling of leadership. And also policies can now more tangibly follow through on kind of people first aspirations, right? Because we make need support a central consideration. So you're going to build a lot of trust. Think about that first slide in the deck, one of the early slides, where we saw trust that employees believe leaders care about them dropping off. This is the kind of action based on real scientific evidence about fulfillment, human fulfillment, that is going to turn that ship around and move it in the right direction. So we want to then make sure that well-being, and I've talked about this, is not transactional. And just quickly, here's a nerd slide. I won't spend too much time on it. Don't worry about numbers and lines, but this is a meta study of over 72 different workplace studies across multiple countries, 32,000 employees, and it showed that when there's need support for these basic needs, it drives higher quality motivation, and we see lower distress, greater well-being, greater engagement, positive work behavior. This works, folks, and there's science out there that demonstrates it time and again, so you can really trust it. Need supportive managers. I'll just throw these up here and we'll talk about them very quickly. Team goals and tasks are framed strongly in terms of purpose and rationales. And we have training programs with managers where we show them exactly how to do this when they're working with individuals and their teams. And also, when we say listening skills, too often we will tell a manager, hey, data shows that if you have the teams that have you, if you meet once a week with your team or once a week with your individual members, that those teams do better. So go have a weekly meeting, make that one of your goals. Well, the problem isn't having the weekly meeting. The issue is, well, what are you supposed to do in that meeting, right? You need to know how to listen for need fulfillment. You need to have a framework for how to understand, ask questions, have a discussion. And you can train people directly in this, and we've done it. And it's what we've seen is independent research shows that when you train managers in that, the employees feel that greater sense of fulfillment, right, and what's happening. Finally, need supportive employees. They feel that they are empowered and responsible for fulfillment at work. They understand their well-being needs, right? Now, we all want to be happier people. We all want actually to feel fulfilled in our jobs. And I'll touch on that before we end here in just a minute about how that helps with getting people more engaged with these kinds of programs. But it's really empowering to employees when you say, hey, we're going to give you information to help you feel more fulfilled at work, to be an equal partner with us. And managers also like that because they don't feel like the burden's entirely on them. I mean, don't your managers have enough to do already? Isn't that one of the big pushbacks you have whenever another program comes along? Well, how about an approach that actually, takes the burden off of them to make everybody happy and make everybody engaged, and instead really empowers everyone individually, including every single employee on the team, right? And so we have training that we do with the employees as well. And these 3 steps make need fulfillment practical and attainable, right? And what we've talked about is, first, lead by care, authentically champion support and need fulfillment as kind of a core principle in the culture. Then you've got a framework, embrace the framework. Don't reinvent the wheel. There's a science here of need fulfillment that can guide strategy to culture building, program development, et cetera. And then include everyone, especially employees themselves, in the need fulfilling culture. And if you start to work on all this, then the last thing that we always think about is, well, are we going to get people to actually come, right? If we build it, will they come? Can we get adoption? And I've touched a little bit on this, but this is one of the great things about dealing with the basic human science of fulfillment in the way that we have, which is that everyone, you, me, every leader, every manager, every employee wants this fulfillment, of basic needs in their lives, which includes their work. So there's this intrinsic motivation to pursue fulfillment. There was a study that was done recently where they looked at what employers think employees value and what they really value. And what employers think employees value are things like money, working remotely, trading up to a better company, et cetera. Like, they're looking at all these trends, and like we're gonna use the traditional tools of control, money, et cetera, to get them to stay, right? So this is a transactional mindset. But what employees actually value are things like being valued by the manager, by the organization, a sense of belonging, potential for advancement. In other words, all the things that we've been talking about today, all things that fulfill their basic psychological needs, right? Having caring and trusting teammates, et cetera. And so there was an Adobe study, just one more piece of data here, that when you ask employees in their own words what they want, the top answers from that confirm the desire for autonomy, mastery, and relatedness. pursuing passions and things that I love. In other words, things that interest me, things that I endorse and I can take ownership of. Taking on growth projects, new trainings, ways to build my skill, right? Connecting with coworkers, mentors, networking, building those meaningful relationships where I matter. These were the top things that emerged, not money. It's not that money isn't important. Everybody's got a mortgage or something, right? We all know that's true, but that's just a box to check. We see this in the research all the time. You see it in the happiness literature as well. Once you've got the money you need to cover your needs, cover your tangible needs, then these things are what really matter to people's engagement and to their fulfillment. So this is a science that all employees love because it's about their fundamental well-being and fulfillment. And what this means is they want training and data because it's meaningful self-knowledge that they can use to grow. This is not just something that's layered on top as a burden. This is something that they get excited about, right? So the steps here are get employees thinking and energized about their central role in building a more fulfilling work life. Then give them the data. Again, I'll give you some resources at the end here, but there's all kinds of resources and valid ways to measure basic need support, basic need fulfillment, get data together, and then give that data to everyone, including the employees. Let them see reporting on their key experiences so that they can be thinking about how to engage and to grow, right? Then you can use a lot of that evidence from the model we presented to give them insights. We know from 40 years of research what having low autonomy means, and also we know how to move it, change it, improve it, right? So giving them recipes customized to their needs. And this can all be done because this is a measurable scientific approach. And so just a quick example, we have a platform, Motivation Works, that we do this and we give every employee, after taking a quick survey of needs and fulfillment, they get a dashboard with personalized focus areas. In other words, they get focus areas that are only related to their score. So they immediately have self-learning. Then we give them detailed insights and recommendations to create an action plan. We don't just tell them to create an action plan. We'll say things to them like, ask about, the rationales for your task. You probably can't read this, but we'll then walk them through a recipe for how they can engage with their managers in order to feel more of that sense of endorsement and rationales. By the way, the managers are getting similar recipes from their side, but all geared towards managers. So it really brings people together around this mutual, quest for engagement. It's pretty exciting. And then you build an action plan, but you build an action plan based on a lot of coaching and training about what's going to be effective. And this gives the ability to meaningfully personalize the employee experience feedback, focused on need fulfillment and personalized to every individual. And we've had great success on this. We did just one quick case study, GQR, which is they've had about a 300% growth the last few years as a talent acquisition firm. And in the first year, we saw retention go up. They measured it. Retention went up by 58% because they deployed this system and were able to gain these insights and identify so many specific things that the employees could do and the managers could do and leaders could do. And so I'm out of time. I'll close out by pointing you towards selfdeterminationtheory.org. This is our not-for-profit organization. This is where you can really nerd out and find all of the science for self-determination theory. But I just want to quickly say that it's a science that, again, is a tide that raises all boats. It'll impact engagement. It'll impact, compliance and ethics in your organization with policies and procedures. It impacts performance. It impacts wellness and vitality, diversity and inclusion. It has a positive impact on all these things, particularly if you embrace and engage it authentically. So I just want to say that if you take care of people and if you lead by care in your organizations, you do it authentically, don't worry about the ROI because and your leadership and your C-suite knows that doing that is going to bring benefits everywhere across the organization. In addition to that, nerd out scientific site at selfdeterminationtheory.org. You could also come over to motivationworks.com where we've got training and some other commercial solutions we can talk about. But I wanted to say that after I pointed you towards the free resources as well from the not-for-profit. But we do have, if you want some more turnkey ways to get this going in your organizations at a time when it's sorely needed, feel free to come over to motivationworks.com and or send me an email or reach out to me. You see my information here. And I look forward to talking with you more. And just thanks again for listening. And I think we still have some time for some questions, Mark.
Thanks, Scott. Really good stuff again. Thanks. We do have some questions. You ready for a tough one?
Sure. I love tough questions.
Janine asks, how would you convince a narcissistic CEO that this matters for employees?
That is a great question. Yeah. Well, listen, I think first of all, when you're talking to, when you're talking to CEOs that are narcissistic, I think narcissism is a great quality to have in a CEO, frankly, because you need to have that sense of that comes a lot with kind of that narcissistic bent, that sense of confidence, that ability to kind of push things forward into areas that are unproven, the ability to kind of lead and have a vision and kind of have a big personality, right? The problem becomes when that becomes sort of a controlling bent. And that's where it, as a clinical psychologist, you can kind of cross over into that pathological space. What I will often do in those kinds of meetings is I will put the data in front of them that shows that this approach is a powerful mover of the things that they care about. So I always listen first. Particularly good thing to do with narcissistic CEOs is, what do they care about? What's important to them, right? They will have no problem talking, right? We know this about narcissistic CEOs. And what's great about this model is I don't care what they talk about. I guarantee you that this approach has got data behind it that it's going to improve it. Do they want to talk about retention? Do they want to talk about performance? Do they want to talk about whatever it might be, right? Customer satisfaction, whatever it might be, there's information and data that connects this approach to the outcome. Now, I emphasized a lot in this talk that you ultimately do not want to be transactional about how you think about this, right? But sometimes you need to crawl and then walk and then run. And what's nice about this is that there's plenty of data, more than any other system I've seen out there, that is going to be able to demonstrate and connect this approach to almost any people problem, or even if the CEO doesn't care about people, business problem that's out there. And so this is the way that you start that conversation, get a beachhead, and then you begin to grow it culturally and move it to a place that is less transactional and more authentic, because that's when you'll get the people in the organization really resonating with it and liking it.
Thanks. A couple of more questions. One thing we struggle with is getting good participation with our engagement and culture surveys. I can see how giving employees personal feedback could help with buy-in and participation. What do your clients' participation rates look like?
Yeah, great question. Well, a lot of what I've emphasized here is that people naturally resonate with this, right? Particularly when we frame it as this is a process that is really for you and that you'll be included in. As a matter of fact, in our system, when people participate and take a survey with us in order to measure these things, when they're done, the reports I was showing here, they instantly get those reports. So think about that related to any other employee engagement thing that's out there, where people fill out surveys, it goes off into the ether, and then maybe a week from now, a month from now, something will trickle back to them. Maybe every employee instantly gets a report with insights, et cetera. So just the fact that we're able to frame that out and that we show them the respect of giving them something meaningful has a massive natural improvement to our engagement rates. We get with, just on a voluntary survey, anywhere from 75 to over 90% is probably our average is in this, 75 to 85%. completion rates. And there are other ways that we achieve that as well. Because we're psychometricians and kind of nerds about surveys, we're able to, get a very, very small question set that accurately gets at these concepts. So it only takes about 5 or 6 minutes to complete our core survey and get all these measurements on needs and fulfillment and support. So, it's really a combination of factors, but we get great success with them.
Okay, real quick, one last question. The individual experience reports for employees sound like a great way to get employees involved in the engagement and culture building process. How do you get employees to lean in and use these reports and actions?
Yeah, no, it's another great question. So one of the things that there's a couple of ways in which we do this, and this is true both for the employees as well as the frontline managers. The first is we respect their time, right? We're not giving them a big blanket report and requiring them to try to weed through it and figure out what to do. We're giving them something that is immediately surfacing for them, things that are of interest to them about their experiences or about their team's experiences. And then paired directly with that, we don't just say, hey, as I mentioned earlier, let me give you kind of a cookie cutter, a fortune cookie kind of recommendation. Like, you should listen more to your employees. We're saying, okay, here are 3 specific recipes that we would recommend to you, so that we're giving them the tools to address the very thing that's most salient and ultimately interesting to them about having a better experience that they can then go out and take action on. And it's that combination of support of both relevancy, respecting their time and energy, and building their interest value, and then giving them direct support that we find is incredibly powerful to then get them to engage with that plan, to take actions, and then that becomes a virtuous cycle, because then they start to see changes, and now they're excited about the program. And this is why we've got an incredibly high client retention, because people get onto this system and they adopt that language, they feel more confident, they see everybody working together, and then they just kind of rise up from there.
Thanks, Scott. I really appreciate it. Before we wrap up, a quick reminder to HCI members, today's webcast has been approved for HRCI and SHRM credit, as well as for HCI recertification. Your credits for attending this webcast will soon show up in your My HCI profile under the transcript tab. And while you're there, don't forget to check out hci.org for even more insights, as well as information on our certifications, our virtual conferences, our premium membership, and much more. I'd like to say one more thank you to Scott and to our friends at Motivation Works, and thank you to our webcast viewer. Thanks for spending the hour with us, and we'll see you next time.